Hey friends, it's Robin. Welcome back to my channel. I am so excited for today's video. I have been planning out this huge recommendations video, and this is going to be part one of my very long Halloween recommendations. So all week I am going to be sharing some different Halloween recommendations broken down by vibe. This is going to be broken into 3 parts: today, Wednesday, and Friday. I have 12 different categories, and there are over 50 books that I'm going to be talking about throughout the entire week. So hopefully there is a little something for everyone. I am going to not only break down these by category, so 12 total categories, but within each category, it is going to go from least spooky to most spooky. Spookiness and everything like that is a personal thing. So my spookiest book might not necessarily be your spookiest book. It was just more of a way to break up the fun, cozy, cute books with the spookier books. So today we're going to do the first 4 categories, which are going to be a spooky and atmospheric, cozy, witches, and haunted house. So for each of these, I have 5 recommendations for a total of 20 books that we're going to talk about today. So without further rambling, let's get right into the recommendations. Kicking it off with books with a spooky atmosphere. This was kind of the catch-all for books that are really atmospheric or spooky in some way, but didn't necessarily fit into one of the other categories. And again, I broke this down by spooky factor. So we're going to kick it off with A Strange Grace by Tessa Gratton. This is one of my favorite premises that I am always looking for. This is a small town that has made a deal with a demon for protection, and the town is now cursed, and they have to sacrifice a person to the woods every single year. This is following 3 teens who are starting to unravel the curse and figure out if the town is actually cursed, if there is a way to get around the curse. And it is not only spooky and atmospheric and amazingly written, but this also has a poly romance that I absolutely love. This just has some of the best atmospheric writing ever. It is a very slow paced atmospheric story, so there isn't like a huge plot in this one, but it does have all of the spooky vibes. Next is Through the Woods, which is actually a graphic novel anthology, and this has a collection of 5 spooky stories in it, and this one is absolutely perfect if you want 1, a quick read, and 2, you like visuals with your spooky stories. There were some absolutely amazing ones in here. My personal favorite is the final story in this one, and some of these are extremely creepy. A lot of them are open-ended and things like that, and I think this is a great one for any graphic novel fans, or if you're trying to get into graphic novels. Next is Dark and Shallow Lies by Ginny Myers Sain. I'm going to try and not blind you with the shiny cover, but this is a really dark, cozy, atmospheric story set in Louisiana. And this one is following our heroine who is returning to the bayou. And the year that she is returning, one of the friends that she has down there has gone missing. And this entire town is slightly magical. Everyone there has some sort of power. They are trying to unravel the mystery of what happened to their friend, and a mysterious boy comes to town. This takes place during a hurricane, which really added to the creepy atmospheric setting because there was this constant state of finality where there was like they were running out of time and it felt like a countdown, and it was very creepy and unsettling. There is a lot of unexplained magic in here, and this one has the mix between the cozy atmospheric vibe but also with a slightly creepy undercurrent, and I absolutely loved this book. I ended up giving this one 5 stars, and more people need to pick this one up because it is fantastic. After that is another anthology, and that is The Gathering Dark. I feel like I have talked about this book nonstop since I read it, but everyone needs to read this. This is coming in 4th on the spooky scale. I think it is very, very spooky. I gave 3 of the stories in here 5 stars, and there's only 10, so I gave 3 of the 10 5 stars, and this has some absolutely terrifying stories in here. Even the ones that I didn't 100% love, I thought were super creepy. So if you love an open-ended, unexplained little drop of horror, Highly recommend this one. And then lastly for this category is what I think is the most spooky. It's one of the spookiest books I think I've ever read, and that is The Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay. And not only is this book super spooky, but the adaptation is coming super soon. And if you haven't read it yet, I highly recommend. This one is following this family that is going to this cabin for like a summer vacation. And while the daughter is playing in like the backyard, a man approaches her and is telling her that she needs to take him to her father's. All of a sudden, she runs back to the cabin, and all these people show up at the cabin and end up breaking into the cabin and holding everyone hostage and telling them that they need to choose somebody to die in order to save the world. It is so, so creepy and unsettling, and you never know if any of this is real, if what these people are saying is true, or if they are just here to kill this family. And I was terrified while reading this book. It is, like I said, one of the scariest books I think I've ever read. If you're looking to be spooked this season, I highly recommend this one. We're gonna get into some cozy books. So I still kind of organize this from the like most cozy to I guess the least cozy, but none of these books are spooky in any way. First up is Fangs by I think Sarah Anderson, if I'm remembering correctly. This is another graphic novel, which is weird because I don't read graphic novels. This is a vampire romance and it is so adorable. I read this one last year for the spooky season and I loved it. This just has really cute little panels. This doesn't necessarily have like an overarching plot. It is more just like little peeks into this couple's romance like over time, and it is adorable and I love it. And if you're looking for something that's like a really quick read but still seasonal, definitely check this one out. After that is another book that I've recommended ad nauseum and I'm still not sorry, and that is The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Singu Mandana. And this one is a found family witchy grumpy sunshine romance, and we're following our heroine Mika, who finds herself at this house called Nowhere House, teaching these three young witches how to control their magic. Meanwhile, she is faced with a grumpy librarian who doesn't trust her. There is a cute found family at the house, and everyone is super adorable and wonderful. And this is a story about not only love, but platonic relationships and finding family and all of that, and it is so cute. After that is the entire Veronica Speedwell series by Deanna Raybourn. I haven't talked about this series in a minute, and that is a shame because this is one of my favorite series of all time. This is a Victorian London historical mystery story, and in this one we are following Veronica, who is a scientist. She researches butterflies, and at the beginning of this book, there is a break-in at her recently deceased aunt's house. She is kind of wrapped up into this mystery plot where somebody is out to possibly kill her, and they are trying to figure out why these people want to kill Veronica. How is she connected to all of this? She ends up being teamed up with a guy named Stoker, who is also a scientist, and the two of them have a super, super slow burn enemies to lovers romance, and it is fantastic. After that is another graphic novel, Who Even Am I? And that is Mooncakes by Wendy Zhu and Suzanne Walker. And this is a really cute YA fantasy romance. It is following our heroine, who is a witch, and her childhood friend, who is a werewolf. And the two of them end up having a second chance romance. Along the way, you are learning that there might be a bad witch, and the two of them need to work together to try and figure out who the bad witch is, if they can help take down the witch. And it is also kind of self-discovery. Both of our main characters are figuring out who they are. They are growing up and trying to find their place in the world. They're graduating high school and trying to figure out what their next step is. And it's really cute. I loved the romance. Not only is this a queer romance, but one of our characters is non-binary, and I just I loved everything about this. And then finally, for the cozy books, is Spells for Forgetting by Adrienne Young. I put this last because this is probably the least cozy, but it is still very atmospheric and magical and kind of light. There are no spooky elements to this. You are following this really small, isolated island that is kind of magical and sentient. There was a murder on the island 10 years ago, the same day that the orchards burned down, and you are figuring out who done it, how are all of these events connected, and slowly unraveling the small town's secrets, all while our two main characters are rekindling their romance. And it is so well crafted and beautifully written, and I really loved this one. And it is taking place in the transition between summer to fall, and it just felt so perfect for this time of year. The next category is going to be witches, and again, we're going to go from the least spooky, so starting with Go Hex Yourself by Jessica Clare. This is probably one of the least spooky books on this list. This book is 100% good times only. We are following our heroine who at the beginning of the book responds to a job ad that she thinks is going to be for her favorite card game. And it turns out that she is now the familiar to an actual witch. This witch has a nephew or grandson, I can't remember, and him and his grandmother aunt are trying to convince our heroine that they are actually witches. And it is them going through this mystery plot because someone may be sabotaging this new witch. It is a really funny witchy rom-com of all of these older witches playing pranks and jokes and magical tricks on each other, and it is hilarious. I loved their Grumpy Sunshine forced proximity romance. Our hero is absolutely obsessed with our heroine and is very reluctant to admit his attraction. Absolutely loved this one. If you're looking for a really fun, funny, witchy rom-com, definitely give this one a try. In a very similar vein is The Ex-Hex by Erin Sterling. This, as well as the sequel, are both absolutely fantastic October witchy romances. These take place in October. Both the heroine and the hero in both books are witches, and they end up having to work together to solve some sort of magical mystery. In this first one, it is why magic is going haywire, and in the second one, our heroine is losing her powers, and they're trying to figure out who caused it. They both take place in this really small, cozy town. Think Stars Hollow, Halloween Town, that type of vibe, and they run a magical shop. And it is all the witchy things mixed with a really adorable and steamy romance, and I absolutely love the series. Slightly less funny and more serious is Payback's a Witch by Alana Harper. This leans far more contemporary, in my opinion, than romance. This is following our heroine who is returning to her small town. Her family doesn't have much in the way of power. She ended up leaving and therefore severing her tie to magic. And now that she is returning to her hometown, magic is starting to come back to her. But while their family has magic, it is considered like the weakest of everyone. And she is now in charge of this like magical competition between the other three magical families. And it is her female-female romance with one of the other people in a rival family. And it is our heroine kind of discovering her connection to her power, to her past, to her hometown, to her family, figuring out who she is, where she belongs, all of those things. And the romance kind of comes second, in my opinion. It is a very well done romance, but this is far more about our heroine's personal journey, and they are trying to figure out how to take down one of the rival families who has slowly consumed pretty much all of the power for themselves, and they are trying to take some of that power back. Next up is a YA witch story, and that is The Wicked Deep by Shay Earnshaw. This is following a small seaside town where 3 witches were killed many centuries ago, and now the small town is cursed. So every year, boys end up going into the water and being taken by the Swan Sisters. This summer is now approaching, and a new boy comes to town, and our heroine has immediate connection with this boy, and he does not know that he is now at risk. It is them unraveling the town's secrets and trying to figure out how to stop the Swan Sisters from taking boys from the small town. This does have a romance element that wasn't 100% my favorite. However, the witch portion of this and the atmosphere of this small town is absolutely fantastic. And then lastly for this category is definitely the spookiest book in this category, and that is The Year of the Witching by Alexis Henderson. This is another book I've talked about a lot on my channel. I love Alexis Henderson and I love this book. This is a puritanical witchy story where our heroine lives in this small puritanical society, and she is kind of forced to live on the outskirts because her mother was considered a sinner and had an affair with a black man from a local village. And after that, her mother ended up becoming associated with magic, with the witches, and now her mother has passed away, and she is dealing with the after effects of all of that. And because of that, our heroine just wants to fit in. She just wants to get by, but she ends up getting sucked into the woods where these three evil witches are said to live. From there, she meets the witches, and things kind of take off. This has a big exploration of that puritanical society and its creepy undercurrent, as well as a lot of feminist themes. And these witches are straight up evil, and I loved it. All right, I'm sorry if the angle changed or anything, but my memory ended up getting filled, so I had to take a little hiatus. But on to the final category for this round, and that is haunted house stories. So first up, we have The Girls Are Never Gone by Sarah Glenn Marsh. And this one is following our heroine, who is a podcaster, and she is kind of starting over after a really successful YouTube channel with her ex, and now she is going to this supposedly haunted house where she is going to spend the summer and try to figure out what is actually going on at this house, all while working with this other girl and her family as they are renovating this house. There is a haunted lake. Not only is the house haunted, but the lake is haunted. It is very creepy, it is very eerie, but it is still YA, so it is still fun. There's also a female-female romance, as well as chronic illness disability rep because our heroine has type 1 diabetes. Definitely one that I recommend if you want something that is kind of creepy haunted house, but not absolutely terrifying. From there, we go to The Turn of the Key by Ruth Ware. This is following a woman who becomes a nanny to this family who have this like really smart house. She is going to be the nanny for two young girls, and she thinks that it is going to be like the easiest job, the best job. You are slowly figuring out whether or not this house is haunted or occupied or smart or what it is. This is told in a really cool format as well, because we open up with our heroine who is in prison and she is writing a letter to someone saying, here is what really happened, can you help me get out of jail? It is creepy and dark and eerie, and the twist ending, it's going to be hit or miss on whether or not you like the ending, but it is definitely a surprising one. After that is another YA haunted house, and that is Within These Wicked Walls by Lauren Blackwood. I will say this leans quite on the older end of YA, and this is a really cool take on a haunted house story because this is essentially a gothic version of Jane Eyre. I want to say it's set in Ethiopia, if I'm remembering correctly. We are following our heroine who has some sort of abilities. She is able to perform exorcisms. She takes this journey across the desert right at the beginning of the story and finds her way to her new job, which is trying to exorcise a very, very haunted house for this reclusive man. And it is very creepy and very, very haunted. There are some very creepy scenes in this house. This is probably one of the most haunted houses I've ever read, and you get a lot of scenes of the house being haunted. There is a slight romance element in here. I loved the writing. I loved the entire take on this gothic haunted house story. Next is The Book of Cold Cases by Simone St. James. This is another book I talked about kind of recently, but in this one we are following two timelines, which is very common for Simone St. James books, but we are following our heroine who is a podcaster, and she covers cold cases or old murders and things like that and tries to figure out what happened. And so she is covering a crime that happened 30 years ago. There was somebody who was murdered on the side of the road, and everyone believes it was this woman, only there was never enough like evidence to convict her. And so she has lived in this mansion all by herself for all of these years, and now she is going to tell her version of the story. And the one rule is that our podcaster must travel to her mansion in order to hear the story. And you are flashing between interviews with this woman as well as glimpses of what happened 30 years ago. And the house is terrifying and creepy things happen. And there is a scene both in the kitchen and in the bathroom. And if you have read it, you know what I'm talking about. But those scenes scared the living crap out of me. Simone St. James also always plays with paranormal aspects, so this is a legitimately slightly paranormal story. So this is going to be on like every haunted house recommendation, but for good reason, and that is Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. This is my personal favorite Riley Sager. This is following our heroine who grew up in this house, and her family only lived there for like a couple of weeks, if I'm remembering correctly. They ended up fleeing the house in the middle of the night, and her father went on to write like a tell-all about their experience living in a haunted house, and it ends up making them famous. Our heroine, as she is growing up, absolutely hates the fact that everyone knows about her history because she does not remember this time in this haunted house, but everyone associates her with this haunted house, and so she wants nothing to do with it. She tries to forget that it ever happened. The only problem is that her father passes away and leaves her the haunted house, and now she has to return to this haunted house and renovate it and put it up for sale. While she is doing that, she is getting to know some people that live on and around the property and trying to figure out if this house is actually haunted. And this is another one that has a really cool storytelling style where in between the chapters there are little glimpses from the book that her father wrote, and it is just fantastic. I loved this one so much. This is one that will leave you questioning all the way to the very end on whether or not this house is really haunted. So that is it for this first round of recommendations. That is 20 books that I recommend for the Halloween spooky season. In the next round, we'll be going over 4 more categories: vampires, werewolves, monster, and dark academia. That will be coming in just a couple of days. So let me know if you've read any of these. Let me know if you added any of these to your TBR, and I will catch y'all in my next video. Bye.